Sanbonani, and welcome to another Poetry Africa seminar. My name is Khwezi Becker, and I will be the moderator today. And today we are unmuting our democracies and their lacks. We are going to talk about the topic, Say No to Corruption, Defend Our Democracy. And I'm joined here by really amazing poets, artists, thinkers, Athol Williams from South Africa, Xabiso Vili from South Africa, Yohannes from Ethiopia, and Hlox the Rebel from South Africa as well. Welcome to each of you and thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to go straight into introducing these wonderful people so that you all know a bit more about them, and then we can go straight into the discussion. First, Xabiso Vili is an award-winning performer, writer, new media artist, producer, and social activist. His writings explore his inner world to relate to the outer world. He is the champion of multiple slams and was Poet of the Year for 2014 and 2015. Xabiso has been published in various anthologies and also online. He has performed throughout the Southern Africa Development Community region, as well as in Scotland, England, the US, India, and France. He strongly believes that art influences his community positively and is constantly working towards creating alternative stages for art to be shared. Xabiso is currently involved in researching and creating methodology for how the process of writing can be used as a tool for therapy and healing. He runs writing, performance, and event organizing workshops and has assisted in producing other award-winning writers and performers. He has also worked on various abandoned spaces in Pretoria and converted them into art hubs. Welcome, Xabiso. Hello, hello.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Lovely to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yay. Next, I'd like to welcome Hlox the Rebel. Hlox is a poet, comedian, creative writing and performance workshop facilitator, arts entrepreneur, and digital marketing strategist. Born in Qwaqwa in the Orange Free State, South Africa, Hlox the Rebel fell in love with writing in 2008 and took his work to stage in 2010. In 2011, he founded Signature Poetry Movement, a live performance and literature company with the primary aim of offering a platform to emerging poets and musicians in both rural and urban areas. He is also the founder and director of Wakanda, a community development nonprofit company aimed at building self-reliant and economically independent communities in rural township areas in and around Qwaqwa. Welcome, Hlox. Lovely to have you. Yay, there we go.
Awesome. It's great to be here.
Good to have you here. Thank you. And now I go to Ethiopia. I welcome Yohannes, who is an Ethiopian poet and writer, but most of all, a human being who is a strong believer in love. A 2016 resident of the International Writing Program, she is Ethiopia's only female representative out of 5 since the program started in 1967. Christine has changed countries, continents, jobs, and appellations constantly. Fearless and adventurous, she has thrived in everything she has set her mind to with the unshaken support of admirable African women. She desires to do the same for the women around her and for future generations. Thank you so much for joining us, Christine.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad that the internet exists so that we can meet in South Africa, even with you all the way over there.
Definitely.
And now I welcome Athol Williams from South Africa. Ubaba Athol is renowned for his literary and advocacy work to foster a more just society. He has published 17 books, including 6 books of poetry and the Oki series of children's picture books. His most recent poetry book, Whistleblowing, stems from his ordeal following blowing the whistle on state capture and corruption in South Africa. He is a 2-time winner of the Soutblike European Union Poetry Award, as well as 4 other literary awards. Over 100 of his poems have been published in journals and anthologies around the world. As a social philosopher, Athol is a regular speaker and author of articles relating to social and ethical matters. He holds 6 degrees from Harvard, Oxford, MIT, LSE, London Business School, and WITS. Welcome, Xabiso.
Wonderful to be here, Noma Khwezi.
Yeah, wonderful to have you. And so with that, let's not waste any time. Let's get straight into the discussion. So I would like to ask each of you, I know that poetry has been part of many of our liberation movements throughout the African continent and throughout the world. And liberation movements, not only in terms of liberation from colonization, from systems such as apartheid and communisms and all kinds of other isms that have oppressed us, but also from current liberations that we go through now, from sexism, from gender bias, from crime, from all kinds of things that we need, from poverty, from all these cracks of anger that exist in our society, liberation from those cracks. And poetry has been such a transformative tool, at least I see it that way. But I'm curious to know, through your work, what has your encounter been with poetry in this way? And do you feel like there's enough credit given to poetry or art as a political driving force? And perhaps even more importantly, as a healing tool from all of these things that are cracking us and making us fall apart. I think I will begin with you, Xabiso.
You're going for the gray hair first.
Yeah, respect our elders.
Noma Khwezi, I like the way you've positioned that we as societies have got these cracks and these wounds. And I think, for me, poetry is a store and reminder of our humanity. I think before it becomes a tool and a weapon for us to fight the evils around us, which of course it is, for me, it's first and foremost that place where we remind ourselves of our humanity and have the space to celebrate that humanity. Because I do see us overcoming our social ills by both knocking down that which is bad, but also lifting up that which is good. And I think poetry plays both those roles, but I certainly love to see it as this place where we go and celebrate and remind ourselves of our humanity.
Thank you so much. And that's very true. And that's why before we are women or mothers or sisters or brothers or uncles or fathers, etc., business owners, etc., we are people. And people feel, and people think, and people interrogate, and people are expansive in so many ways. And until we remember that we are people, and my people inside is the same as your people inside, yet different, and be curious about the difference rather than fearful of it, that's when a change might occur. So yeah, definitely, I hear you there. Christine, could you please chime in?
Sure. I think, the way I define myself is also as a human being. So everything that Athol said resonates deeply within me. I tend to always say this when I open up about poetry, is that traditionally, at least in my country, it had always been a tool that's been utilized to, take on the powers as it's an art form, but at the same time, it's an art form that permits you to have freedom, and freedom of expression is primordial, really, because if we are not allowed to express who we are, then can we really exist, right? And of course, we can express ourselves in the way that we dress or what we eat and how we interact, etc. But if then what we say is controlled, then it's almost as though we don't exist. So poetry is definitely a very, very powerful art form, and it's unfortunate that it is not, it's overly underrated, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. Definitely. I resonate. Couldn't say it better. Please, can we go to Hlox?
Dumelang, to me, poetry as the most aggressive measure of one expressing themselves. I don't know how many times I've been chased from stages because I've said the wrong things at the wrong time. Hence I got the name Hlox the Rebel. You know, that's when I stopped getting booked. But it has so much freedom, you know. You cannot say half the things that we have said to the audiences. That friend of mine today, that I use the words that you know as a poet, but then just put them in a way that makes sense. That makes sense more than you could ever think. So it has been that weapon against being silenced, that weapon for speaking out against injustices, you know. So to me, that's what it means. Freedom of expression, best defined, poetry.
Definitely. A collage of words in a way that we can't usually see. And every poet has a different collage that they create. And I was just saying yesterday in one of the performances, a poet looks at a word and goes, I see a song there. Someone goes, no, I don't see a song. No, me, I see a song. No, I see a painting. No, I see a wave. And people look at you like, what? And then you say it and you're like, oh, yeah, you're right. I take it back. No, words are expansive. So definitely. But Xabiso.
Yeah, greetings to everybody at home, to the panelists. I mean, it's a very exciting conversation, and I think it's springboarding off some conversations that have been had throughout Poetry Africa around how our stories make us, right? And how we exist because of these stories, and how we validate each other's existence when we interact with the stories, when we collaborate, when we tell those stories. And I think it goes even a step further, that we're not only stating that, look at me, I exist, we are here, but I think poetry also starts to exist in this world where we can reimagine what we want to look like, where we can reimagine the spaces around us. So it definitely does, you know, it calls into question and critiques our reality, but also starts to take it a step further by starting to imagine what answers might look like, and starting to ask those questions and interacting with an audience and a reader in that way.
Definitely, I agree. And piggybacking off of what you're saying is that looking at things and looking at the fractures and critiquing them and going, this is not it. This is not enough. Pull up your socks. And I feel like in South Africa, at least in particular, I know that there's been a lot of generational, just, I don't know how to describe this in an English word, but ukazuga of the generations, and to the separation with the frustration of our democracy. Because I think the idea was democracy will equal freedom, right? And this is something Bob Athol is speaking about quite often, is that that was the assumption, that no, of course, democracy means freedom. And so now we're sitting in a space where democracy doesn't particularly mean that. Where democracy is making the older generations look at their peers and go, but nisenzani, why? Why is this? Why? I thought we were in this. I thought we did this together. I thought we were building and structuring and tearing down in order to, you know, there were these ideals that came with the liberation movement that we had hoped for and wished for. And And then as the younger people, we sit there and we go, where's the leadership? Who is there to go, okay, we've got you. Yes, we know we've got to think for ourselves, but the leadership, the weight is not held because there's such a fracture, I think is the key word, but such a fracture in the voice that is that we're meant to look up to and go, oh, our elders, there's such a just the fighting that is happening there. And so I'm curious to know, one, how that is in other countries, such as in Ethiopia. Is that a thing that is similar in terms of what we are dealing with, in terms of the frustration at the fact that the ideals of what has been worked towards are not coming through and generations are now butting heads? Yes, let me actually just go straight to you, Christine, on that question before I come back home.
Sure. So, it's interesting how it's unfortunate that I'm the only Ethiopian, first of all, on this panel. But at the same time, whenever I find myself in situations like this, my first answer is always, of course, I don't represent my country. I just happen to be an Ethiopian that's come out of there. And so what I say cannot be the truth of the 120 million people that live in my country. And this is without counting the millions of people that are abroad, right? But I'll answer that question because I find it very intriguing, especially because of everything that's been happening since almost a year ago now within Ethiopia, and everything that's been reverberating outside of it, because of course we're not inside the country. I myself am in Kenya at the moment, and so I haven't stepped foot in my country in over 2 years. But we're only hearing what's coming out of it, right? And without really derailing a lot, to kind of come back to the point, I personally think, and this is just me, Christine Yohannes, the poet that's on this panel today, I personally think that there is no such thing as democracy. Mainly because the main, like the first definition of a democracy, first of all, is to make truth of what the majority thinks and believes. And a lot of times the problem is not because of what the majority believes, it's because of the minorities that are left out. And so that's why I always choose to talk about freedom of expression, freedom of existence, and freedom of being who we are, actually, because like among the 120 million people in my country, the biggest percentage is not necessarily the truth for 2 or 3 of the ethnic groups that have been left out of decision making for over 60 years now. But it is actually important to ensure that each one exists within the freedom that they've put together for themselves, if that makes sense. Just to give you like a dumb example, like if I choose to eat my meat raw, but 85% of Ethiopians don't want to do that, does it mean that it is wrong for me to eat my meat raw? And so there's like a clash of beliefs. And I think it's our duty as writers, it is especially my duty as a poet, to really look at what the traditions of my country had been, how integrated what were the systems in the past, and what disintegrated the systems as we started incorporating Western ideals in the way that we started dealing with each other, is also a question that I think is crucial to ask. But definitely you are right in saying that there's definitely a clash between the previous generations and the current generation, because unlike the other 53 countries on the continent, Ethiopia is one of the only ones that's never been colonized, which means that fight against colonialism or this outer enemy never existed. And so our traditions, our way of being, kept just being forgotten over the years in the name of development and modernization. And so it's really hard to fight an enemy that is not coming at you directly. And I think that that's where our eyes need to open up more as this generation, really, and really start questioning where we stand in ensuring that, you know, we can move forward as one country.
Thank you so much for that. A lot of that resonates, and yeah, you as the poet speaking is all we want, and that we appreciate as well. Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, for us, I think what's happening now is that it's also some of this, we had a target and we had a thing that everyone was in it for together. And then that thing was overthrown, quote unquote, yeah. But now it's like, okay, now who are we fighting? And now the fight has turned inward. And that is making us see how much was neglected in terms of all kinds of situations about truth and reconciliation and all these things, and lack of passing on things to the next generations. And now my generation is going, oh, okay, wait, but to fix, I need to pick back up, because now, and then those here who were meant to do some of that passing on weren't able to, right? Didn't do it, or thought they shouldn't in this particular instance, whatever. We all think that we're doing the right thing in the moment that we're doing it. And then in retrospect, you go, maybe not. But coming to you, Xabiso, I think curious to know, as, yeah, from your standpoint, how is it feeling to be within this fractured state?
Yeah, and I mean, I think I'm truly disappointed, right? Like, disappointment is the word. In an imagined perfect state, there would be some kind of cohesion between the youth and the older generation of, you know, learning, but also then of putting in action, right? And working together towards fixing fractures, towards this imagined world that we want to live in. But I think we find ourselves in South Africa dealing with people that want to hold on to power, dealing with people that want to hold on to money. You look at the parliament, and you look at the current reigning party, and, you know, like just filled with people over 60, right? Filled with people that still want to run the country like it's Mkhonto Sizwe. And I mean, that's difficult because the world is changing, right? And we need to keep up with the world, and we don't want to leave people behind. But because of this fracture, I don't think that this communication is happening. And so I think, you know, with listening to what Christine is saying, I definitely think it shows this fracture of, like, there is no democracy. We kind of live in democracy only in the word of democracy, only kind of like in the action of, you know, in the pretense of it, in putting together like the steps, but like having no actual outcome, right? Because the people aren't listened to, and the will of the people isn't, you know, kind of put out there. And I mean, I'm very interested in systems of oppressors and how those work, you know, because also we know we've been taught how revolutions work, that once the top class is overthrown, the middle class goes into the top class, and the top class goes into the middle class, and the bottom class stays the bottom class. And you do that, you know, through sloganizing and getting the people, you know, excited to vote for you. And they are, you know, I would say like algorithms, you know, that exist to keep people perpetuating almost their own oppression within the ballot box, and governments, you know, thrive on that. I always think of this moment in one of Ben Orkney's books when voting time has come, and the political parties arrive, you know, in the townships, and they say, vote for us, and they give out, you know, these milk parcels to people to vote, and the people go and they vote, and then when the people return and open the milk parcels, the milk is rotten, you know, and they have to pour the milk out into the street, and it floods the street, and the stench stays, and the politicians are gone. And so yeah, it's really interesting how this, you know, fractured system works in maintaining that rottenness, and then how and where does poetry fit in this? And I think it really first of all, before we do anything, we need to be aware that we are being oppressed, you know? And maybe that's where the art and the work and the poetry and the writing kind of stems from. And then where do we go to from here?
Definitely. And also making that art accessible, because I think a lot of the thing that we do is that we speak in spaces like this amongst each other, those of us who already have the language to say these things, and then who then later comes through and unpacks for those who have not yet found the language, right? That's like those people who have been raised in spaces where they don't know what gentleness is, and then suddenly you come with your love that's so gentle, and they go, oh, okay, I can go over you. No, baby, this is a space for you to be gentle, but unless I help you find that, then what? So I think to broaden, and that for me also is part of what art is and does, is to broaden access to these conversations that must be had in more than just this or this level. There's so many other levels trickling down that need to receive that. So, Athol, coming to you on this matter.
Sis, I think it's been amazing the comments made already. This idea of the generational fracturing, firstly, it's very real because we live that. And I've been trying to figure out which of these generations I fit into. And it's interesting because, I was 24 years old when political apartheid fell in some form. And so I was a teenager during the uprising. So not a leader, sort of a participant towards the tail end, right? I was 15, 16, so not the front of any of those movements. But so the generation older than me were the fathers, the mothers, the leaders, the thinkers, the drivers of it. And I want to, if you allowed me to say this generation after me, who have sort of inherited what's created. And so I'm looking at myself and saying, well, where do I fit in? And I think it's my generation who got caught up in the hubris of a lot of these ideologies. So it's my generation who all were the first in their families to get degrees, or the first in their families to have professional roles. And what we did was we ran out and focused on self. We went and ran out and focused on economic wealth, and we focused on being westernized, right? We were the first generation that all went and studied in the US and the UK. We embraced Gucci and Louis Vuitton because that's not what our parents had, right? Our parents never had that. And so we rushed, and in a way, it was the hubris, it was this excitement. We got caught up. 1995, we won the Rugby World Cup. Because my generation got excited about these things and then said, okay, all the hard work is done. Everything's just fine. And so we dropped the ball. And so, I worked in business for over 20 years. And so I followed that path absolutely. And so for me, my journey of the last sort of 10 to 20 years has been the struggle between believing in what democracy could offer, and the question of saying, but I'm living a life very different. Firstly, I'm not what this democracy promises is not manifest in our society, but more importantly, what am I doing about it? And I think my poetry begins to try and call us back home in a way of saying, African child, you've forgotten who you are. We've just taken wholesale these Western ideas and dropped it on our society. So we've taken capitalism and dropped it here. We've taken consumerism and dropped it here. We've taken Western style democracy and just dropped it here, and believed that it's all going to be well because my previous generation said so. And I think we were the ones who just accepted it lock, stock, and barrel, whereas I think the generation after me are beginning to question it because it's not manifesting. And so I think it's important for my generation to begin to say we should have been that bridge between taking these ideals and making them real. Yet we are all the ones now driving the big BMWs and the Mercedes. And so I certainly, in my work, try to speak to that generation in particular of saying, we've got to wake up. We've lost our humanity. We've lost our Africanness. And I think that's where poetry plays a powerful role in bridging this fracture, because I think when the next generation has got a lot to do to change things and fix things, I think the next 10 to 20 years is my generation is going to have the ability to do it. But yet we're the ones who are actually taking us backward.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, honestly, because I think we also sometimes forget that we go, there's one generation and then the younger generation, and there's so much in between and still coming up that is already alive. And looking at that and going, now what? Are you seeing? Are you seeing where you tripped? Okay, so how do we move that thing out of the way now that we see where we tripped, right? But Hlox, can I bring it to you?
Thank you very much. So with me, this whole democracy concept as a new concept. It was sold to us. As I said, I'm from Kwakwa and the eastern part of the Free State. So this democracy concept was sold to us in 1994, sold to us with the rest of the country. What we were from the 1st of November 1974 until 1994 was what was called a self-governed state. So we had our own parliament, we had our own factories, we had everything. We have universities, we have over 10 colleges, we have over 350 schools, which were built by the community in partnership with the self-governed state government. So when the democracy came through and the whole concept was introduced to our people, what we were before in the roads that we have, Xabiso was here, he once visited us for a poetry session. The roads that we have, the university that we have, the schools, the factories, as what was built by the people of Kwakwa and the self-governed state. So what the people had was a development fund account where everyone contributed 10 rands a month towards the community development fund. So each and everyone felt somehow responsible for the development of this place. Hence, we have what we have today. That taking us back to why we now calling it Wakanda, because when we watched the movie Black Panther, we're like, this is what we were before democracy came through. So in 1994, the people, we were a community-led or a pure community-led citizens, where the community was active. If there was a plumber, the plumber would do what they're supposed to do. Everyone was taking care of everything. So when we were introduced into democracy in 1994, we were introduced to dependency. So what democracy did with our people, the people who used to plant for their food, the people who used to build houses with their own hands and not wait for so many years, telling you that, being told that you are in a list from 1977, you'll be in another list and another list, that people just used to spot land and then go to the chief, and then the chief will be like, this is a beautiful land for building. And then the then government, the self-governed state government, would start building. So with the dependency government, with this democracy thing, when it came through, it was like, you know what, you won't have to wipe your noses anymore. We are here for you. You do not have to lift a finger. We will create jobs. We will do this. We will do that. We will do that. And the people didn't know about that. They had never heard of anything like that because they were used to working and paying for every development that they wanted to see in their area. So when something like that came through, like you do not have to pay anymore, those 10 rents, forget about them. That's forced tax, and then they came through with whole lot of everything. And then the community was like, you know what, let us try these new guys out, forgetting that these new guys were in prison when they and their self-governed state were building this beautiful place. And now prisoners come through and promise you this beautiful land. When did they start building this beautiful land? When they were in prison, because they had never come out and took on counseling and took some time out, because I still think that our leaders are very traumatized right now. You cannot just come out of prison and start leading a nation. You have to go through therapy, psychologists, and then forget about all the trauma. So when we were introduced to this democracy, we were introduced to dependency. So now everything that we used to have has demolished. everything. We used to have festivals. Kwakwa used to have international artists coming through, building our economy, because we also have a mountainous, beautiful area, bringing the tourists into this place. So with this democracy concept, I can quote Chris Rock when he said to him, if you're a Black person in America, America is like an uncle that paid your way through college but molested you. That's exactly how I feel about the democracy government. It's like an uncle that paid through my way through college but then molested us, because as we stand right now, our place is very molested. Thank you.
Yeah, but you're segueing beautifully into my last point, and you're saying such pertinent things. The dependency government, that is a huge thing that my mother and I speak about so often. And we sit and we go, because if someone tells you they're going to give you something for free, are you not going to jump? Of course you're going to jump for it. If they tell you, I've got it, relax, you don't have to lift a finger, you're going to jump, you're going to run for it. And that has created such a culture of handouts in our country. Yes, there are things that the government is definitely responsible for, but they have raised a generation of handout seekers as well, which is really unfortunate. And the agency of the self, which is what we are about as a people, as human beings, right? You see something that's wrong, you fix it. It's in us as human beings. We do things, we think for ourselves, we ask questions for ourselves, we do all of these things. And that has been torn out. And so now that trickling back to those people is a hurdle, an additional hurdle we have to face from all the trauma that has happened already. So now you're not only dealing with that trauma, you're dealing with new traumas that have been created currently, which is fascinating. So yeah, thank you. And leading into my last point, but we're talking about this dismembering. We're talking about how do we unravel all of these things that have been so difficult for us to handle and deal with. And then we go, yes, we've got to deconstruct, and the narrative is that. What does that deconstruction look like and feel like for you? And perhaps more necessarily, what does then the process look like of coming into a new space of going, we now need to rebuild what a, don't necessarily want to use the word democracy, but what a new democracy, what a new freedom, what a new agency of self looks like. And what does the role, do you feel, of yourself as a poet or of poets around you look like? What weight is that role of the poet given in that space? I'll come to you, Becker.
Sis, I had my hand raised earlier, but we hadn't established the protocols of hand raising. I think I'm a bit unsure about our critique of democracy, of whether we are critiquing democracy as an ideology, one which seeks to fulfill and live out the will of the people, or are we critiquing just the change in political leadership? Because I think it's absolutely right that our promise of freedom has not been realized by our political leadership in South Africa and its other parts of Africa as well. But are we placing all of that at the foot of democracy, or are we placing that at the foot of poor leadership who haven't executed and lived by their ideals? And I think it's important to distinguish that. I think there's absolutely space for us to be questioning the ideology of democracy and say, are there other ways we should be governing our lives and ourselves? But we can still hold on to democracy and still hold leadership accountable. And I think both need to be explored, but in separate ways. I certainly think that I focus on the second part, not the first. So I'm almost willing to say, I'm willing to accept democracy as an ideology with all of its many faults, but we need to find a way to make it more meaningful and true to its intent around the will of the people, represent the will of the people, and acting to fulfill the will of the people. And I think that's where, that's the promise democracy offers. I never saw democracy as the endpoint. For me, it's a platform to deliver freedom. And it's and for me, that was the promise that I bought, and I was willing to stand by, saying there's this way of governing ourselves, and democracy offers this way of governing ourselves, and that at least offered us the opportunity then to deliver freedom. Now, we haven't realized that freedom, partly because we haven't followed the constructs of democracy. And so what I want to be building isn't necessarily building complete new democratic structures or governance structures, but just trying to get people to be honest and sincere, to move away from this disease we've got, where we say it's enough to speak and say the right words and be completely void of any action. Because I think part of what our brother Hlox, the rebel, is talking about is, one thing we could say, what follows from what he's saying, is let's go back to the world where Kwakwa was an independent state, and so that's one answer, and then we can go back again further, right? And that's my difficulty with the idea of going back, because then we can all go back to different places. We're saying people must go back to countries they come from. Whereas what I think we've got, the challenge we've got, I think, is what Africa needs doesn't exist, has never existed. We've got to create it. And so we've got to say, here we are with our many differences and our different ideals. How do we create the structure and the society to enable that, to realize that? What we're doing now is, I think we say there's a menu. Pick A for democracy, pick B for communism, pick C for whatever else. And I don't think there's a menu item. We need to create this way of being, this way of interacting. And I think art and poetry should lead that exploration, because I think we need to create something new, something different that doesn't exist.
No, that's a good way to definitely look at it. Doesn't exist, but bringing forward lessons, bringing forward rather than returning back. So we are taking the bags that we've been given and going, okay, let's journey. It's time to journey. Let's journey together. Let's do it. But Xabiso.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and I think, one of the main problems is that we're led by uncreative thinkers. I think that there's been, in this time, there's been so many, fights for different forms of equality and equity. I think from the total shutdown movements to the fees must fall movements. And there's just been a general non-engagement from our leaders. And again, with what Athol is saying around, separating the political, the failure in political power from this ideology of democracy, because you can, if our leaders were thinking creatively, they would look at, other structures that exist in the world, and we would start to think about that. If you look at spaces like, in the Baltic regions, when you start to look at Sweden, you start to look at Norway, you would see that free education is one of the greatest investments you can make into a country, right? And then through that, you can start to set up spaces where from the very grassroots level, you can offer therapy and counseling for people. You can start to, decrease the need for police presence. You can offer up hospital spaces. You can really start to redefine the space we live in. And so this is also, becomes the importance of the arts in inducing and creating that creativity in thinking about the world. I think, I always relate back to my time when I was working with the abandoned buildings and the abandoned spaces. There'd be government buildings that are left barren, like in these communities, and they remain abandoned, or they turn into drug dens or whatever. And, we would go in as artists and we would take over, and we'd slowly, go from like no electricity, but we'd start painting, figure out how to get electricity. And for me, that's the kind of radical democracy that I think I almost resonate with on a particular level when Hlox is speaking, right? It's that idea of we are doing this work with each other to build with each other. And I think the problem now is that there's still this conversation from the political leaders of that, yes, this is the democracy and this is what we're doing, but they're just using this space to hold on to that power and to fill their own pockets. And there isn't then the feeding back into the society. There isn't the thinking creatively about society. And again, I agree and resonate with Athol when he says that there is that gap between I think my dad would be about around your age, Athol, and I think myself and him, we have completely different ideas of what success looks like, and he works within the tender space as well. And for me, it doesn't make sense. Like the ideas of success aren't aligned. They aren't necessarily based on let's improve the community, let's move together, but rather how do we externally showcase our wealth, and I really think that's how a lot of people in power operate, and that's how a lot of people in power work. And so there's a lot of work that art needs to do to start shifting that thought pattern and to start shifting that view of the world.
Yep. Definitely. And to be in conversation with human beings rather than going, I'm the leader, you do this, or you're in conversation. That's what leadership is, and that's what it needs to become for so many of us. And that's what art does. So technically, 1 and 2 must take a hint, government, but it's okay. We'll come back to you. But Hlox. Mara that button, Mos. Mara that button. To unmute like hi. There we go.
And it always does that when the conversation is heated. You have to go unmute. This is the theme of the festival. Anyway. What I loved this year was the Abahlali campaign, the for the Arts campaign that was happening at the National Arts Council offices. We were there on the 31st with Xabiso. So I always imagined what would happen. I was always thinking an artist shutdown, like we have to do a shutdown because these people are not listening to us and whatever. But what the artists did, because artists are beautiful people and we're all about expressing ourselves, they went into that building and they made it stay in, day out. I thought it was going to be for a week, it was going to be for 2 weeks, but it went for over a month. And Mas Bongile was there every day. I remember I left Kwa on the 31st of March and I joined Xabiso because I could see where this was going. I could feel that this was the revolution of the arts in South Africa, but that wasn't the case. Yet again, we were muted. Newspapers were not writing about us. The news channels were not. That was the biggest protest, I think, in the world of artists moving into an office and demanding answers. That was the most beautiful way of demonstrating our democracy. But if the democracy is going to go one way, like if we're going to practice what's written in the Constitution and express ourselves in peaceful ways and try and find ways where we could sit with ministers and your MECs and tell them our side of the story, and then they can tell us their side of the story. And also when we do that, we are still muted. So currently I feel like it's still not being the Constitution is not what the paper it's written on, because I have to give it up for the artists of South Africa. The artists of Africa, they really did an amazing job. The stories and books will be written about what happened this year. Our children our children will be grateful for what happened this year. You know, a revolution is not won overnight, but with this generation of artists and this generation of the youth, I love the quote, we are the ones we've been waiting for, because I can see that we are no longer, the youth is tired of burning tires, is tired of picketing, and is tired of burning stores. We just want to find a moment where we can sit with the leadership and tell them what's on our minds. Because our slogan is Kopano ke Matla, which is what's happening right now. We are stronger in unison, which is what's happening with Poetry Africa right now. Imagine if it was not going to happen because of whatever reasons, because we didn't have funding, because we couldn't have the audience in the theaters. But now we have Hear My Voice working with Poetry Africa and UKZN, and that's how we can come together as artists, as arts organizations and community-based organizations, and start coming up with solutions and just move forward. If the government decides to solve them things and then understand them with democracy and the constitution like artists do, they will find us on the way, already doing the work that we're supposed to be doing. Yeah, thank you very much.
Masambe, let's go. Let's journey. I hear you. I'm with you. This is Christine. Please, can you say from where you are and your space in the world, your response to this, and perhaps that would also be a beautiful way to go forward into your poetry or whatever closing words, gifts you might like to offer us.
Well, thank you for that. Honestly, everything has been said, and we won't have enough time to really get into all of the details. I don't mean today, but I mean, these conversations are conversations that should have been had 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and we're still going to keep having them. And earlier you had asked what our role as a poet was. And I believe that, and I think I've already said this to the last time when I was having the IG live with Xabiso, that as a poet, my job is not to be an activist. My job is not to pick up arms and go marching on the streets. And, you know, my job is to be able to highlight what I think is wrong in whatever systems that I'm existing in, just to make sure that the future generations can correct it, right? And bouncing off of what Athol had said earlier, it's definitely not about going back to what we were doing, but there were definitely things that we were doing right in the past that our ancestors had figured out, that our ancestors were doing right. And of course, they weren't perfect, but we can learn from their imperfections. And then as we go, we can incorporate whatever it is just to come up with whatever can work. And of course, whatever system that we're going to believe in 100% is also going to have its own imperfections, because, you know, us ourselves, we're not perfect, and we can't really achieve perfection. But I'm glad that now spaces for freedom of expression exist, and that at least the conversations are being had, because that's really the only way of being able to move forward. And it's really heartwarming what Hlox had said earlier about being in it together, because if we are not holding each other's hands, then it's really hard to move forward. I think that's my reflection, but I definitely have a poem if you'll have it. So I was saying in one of the previous events, I don't like titling my poems, so you can give it whatever title you want. It's so sad. It's so sad I don't have words to utter. I can only mutter the discomfort they feel when finally the silenced voices we bore for centuries start screaming. I am hurt. My heart's broken. I am disheartened. My heart's hardened to the point where even riots don't arouse my fearless soul. It's weeping. I weep, I cry, but these ain't tears of no crocodile or tears that flow on plump sad cheeks. It's water-based blood dripping slowly from my heart that's bleeding. I'm mad. I am furious. I am enraged, in fact, and parts of me are willing to fly like moth to a flame to the entrapment you've so willingly designed for my kind. But my rage will not allow me to entangle the invisible chains and break away from this cage you've so willfully crafted for the unexpected innocence of my mind. I am weary of my Black mother's backbones that broke to get me here, to this success place to make me strong enough to achieve the epitome of the grind. Silenced voices will always resonate louder than the muffle that chain and zip them shut. Cain's hands were bloody, the soil reeked of Abel's soul, and the iron stench of injustice halt. They stop you dead in your tracks because sin is a sinful sinner's synergy of dead end zone of the dead people's souls. Souls you've strangled half to death, made kneel towards your gods and knelt on to ensure they disappear. Dissipating lies of propagated smoke, you've puffed up our asses with false recognition of our kind, those who will into existence what you want to appear. But here we are lost, distraught, and out of sight, just like you needed us to be. But our might refuses to die. We refuse to die. We refuse to give in. We refuse.
Yeah, we refuse. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your refusal. Thank you. Continue to refuse. And we receive. Please, but Xabiso, could you give us your offering?
Thank you so much, Christine. Yeah, definitely. I think, in a self-reflective process, constantly examining the external, making sense of it internally and your space, and how you exist, in the external as well. I think this poem kind of became that. A nightmare lives on my skin. It is broken glass screaming on chalkboard, screeching, bubbling to bursting, whilst a little girl hides with her newborn brother beneath a bed that is dissolving, and her sister is standing on top of, clawing at an unflinching window in a shack that is burning. Her summer dress is ashing, flaking, unending. I am running, on fire, with broken knees. Their souls have already started chasing me. An ancient ancestor drops a rock at my feet. I am rolling, and the fire craves company in its dying. My socks melt into my ankles. My jacket's elastic creeps into my waist. My scars catch up to me and simmer into broken glass, screaming on chalkboard, screeching, bubbling to bursting. I wake from my nightmare and can't peel the memories off my skin. Sometimes I think that I am still burning.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. I wish I miss audience. Thank you so much. No words. The poet has no words, but thank you. Thank you so much. But Hlox, Gena.
So Bacharele means forgive them. As a poem that I wrote for the young at Kwakwa to forgive the older generation for their past mistakes. Yeah. Kwakanda, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. Your screams resting on the twisting of their wrists, fingers around your throat, Bacharele, with pens down their ankles, hands still stuck in the cookie jar, pinned to the ground, nails in your palms, with a broken jaw and fading smile, breathing through an open wound. Forgive them, with blood still dripping from the corners of their mouths, flesh between their teeth, from tearing your body apart limb by limb, but still limping towards sunrise, a miracle wrapped in a body covered with scars. Bacharele, your children were fed lies, blinded by deceit, for years going to bed with echoes in their stomachs, quenching their thirst with their own mother's tears. See, we have learned that when a man's ribs begin to show on his skin, the bones make music that sends hunger right to slumber. Our ashy lips have become graveyards of prayers blue-ticked by God. Forgive us, Kwakanda. Regret hangs heavy on our parents' shoulders like the burden of carrying the cross of freedom with terms and conditions. Democracy came with pain and brand new bullets, chain and invisible prison bars, children born taking the death penalty with poverty life sentences written in their palms. Forgive us, Wakanda. We had no clue what we were doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yo, that's hard. Yeah.
Wow.
And from this point, where do we go? Time to move. Time to move. After the forgiveness, we have to move.
Yeah.
Or even while we are forgiving, we must move.
Yeah.
It's a continuous.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bob Ethel.
This is no Khwezi. Mine's short. It's just 8 lines. Also no title. I am colorblind, but drenched in delight by the color orange. Only at 50 did I understand that our experiences exceed our language. We cannot say everything we feel or think. Sometimes we have to dance or sing or paint or burn down buildings. But perhaps there are hidden ways. Perhaps we could learn to listen in order to see, look to hear, even touch to taste. And then we'd need no language. We'd need only to be holding hands.
Oh, what better way to end? No language. No language. We hold one another. We move forward. We forge forward.
Yeah.
I thank you for the space. I thank you for your truth. I thank you for your bravery and honesty and courageous vulnerability is a new term that I learned yesterday that I think is apt. Thank you. I wish you light and gentle strength in your journeys ahead. Thank you to Poetry Africa to hear my voice and to our audiences today. Sebo.